We asked the question of why bad things happen to good people, and there's a verse, a pasuk in the Torah that gives us kind of a little perspective on what happens in the face of tragedy. Sarah, our matriarch Sarah, she died when she was 127 years old. And the pasuk goes on to say that she died in Kiryas Arba in Hebron, in the land of Canaan, in Israel. Vayavo Avraham l'spod l'sarov v'livkosan. Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to cry over Sarah. I think that the fact that the Torah tells us that Avraham Avinu, Abraham, he cried and he eulogized Sarah, I think there's a very important lesson here. Now, how old was Sarah? She was 127 years old. Pretty full life. Not only that, Abraham is the paragon of philosophy, of an intellect. Abraham could approach the issue from an intellectual vantage point, clearly, if anyone could. Yet, in the face of tragedy, how do we cope when there's tragedy right before us? We have to first respond to it emotionally. Someone has a tragedy in their life. So it's normal to ask the question of why does such a thing happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? That's a good question. That's a fine question. But it's important to realize that it's really two different questions. In the height of mourning, we don't say, "Oh, you should know the reason why Hashem did that." You know, that's not the appropriate response at that time. Avram Avinu, none of us could say that we're more philosophically oriented than Avram Avinu. Not only that, his tragedy, we'd say, Sarah lived a full life. She lived 127 years old. It's not like she died, when she was 25. It's not so bad. Yes, it's bad, but it's not so bad. Still, says the Torah, Avram Avinu cried for her. He eulogized her. It's okay to respond emotionally. So that Avram Avinu was crying. If he could cry, we could cry when bad things happen to us. But what's interesting is that the many Gemaras that actually ask the philosophical question where we see in our world bad things happening to good people, and the question is why. The Gemara says that when Moshe ascended to heaven to get the Torah, he found the Almighty writing a Sefer Torah, but making little crownlets on top of letters. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam, mima aka b'yadcha? Who's stopping you? The commentaries explain that what he's asking is, why do you need to make so much? Write a Torah, but also write these nice pictures on top of the letters. So, says the Almighty, Amar lo, Adam echad yesh asad liyas b'sof kama shana. There's going to be a person after many years whose name is Akiva ben Yosef, famous Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is going to take every little jot and tittle on top of a letter and going to derive and deduce piles and piles of halachos from it. So, says the Almighty to Moshe, the reason why I'm making these crowns on top of the letters is because of Rabbi Akiva. Moshe is, of course, very impressed. And he says to the Almighty, Ribono shel olam, hari ehuli, show him to me. So what happens? He says, turn around, and instantly Moshe is teleported 1,500 years into the future, and he's sitting in the middle of Rabbi Akiva's lecture. Not only that, he's sitting at the end of 8 rows, and he's listening to the lecture, and he doesn't understand what's going on. And he got a little upset, tashash kocho, he got a little depressed. What's going on over here? What happened? In the middle of the lecture, they got to one matter, and the student said to him, Rabbi Akiva, tell us where's the source of this halacha? Menayin lecha, where do you know this from? Amar lam, he says to him, halacha Moshe Sinai. He says it's halacha Moshe from Har Sinai, and miyad nisyash v'daito. Moshe Rabbeinu is placated and assuaged. He's happy. So what happened? Chazar Rabbi Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he came back to the Almighty, and he said to him, Ribono shel olam, yesh lech adam kazeh, you have someone like Rabbi Akiva, va'at nosen Torah al yadi, but you give the Torah via me? You should use Rabbi Akiva. He should be the one who should give Torah, not me. Rabbi Akiva is so much greater than me. So what does the Almighty respond? Amar lei shtok, be quiet, don't ask questions. Kach Allah b'machsham lefana. This is how it came before my mind. This is the way I'm doing it, and don't interfere. Amar lefanav. So this is the critical point. He says to the Almighty, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, Harisani Torah, you showed me His Torah. You showed me the breadth of Rabbi Akiva's Torah. It's so vast and so exhaustive and so comprehensive that he's able to deduce laws out of little crownlets on top of letters. And I don't even understand when I get there to his lecture. You showed me His Torah. Now show me His reward. Amar lo, he says to him, Chazor lacharecha, turn around. And again, Moshe Rabbeinu is teleported 1,500 years in the future. And Rosh Hashoklin, Besara b'Merkulin, there, Rabbi Akiva died a very grisly death. They scraped off his skin, they flayed his skin, and they were weighing his flesh. And Moshe goes back to the Almighty. Amar Lefanav, Ribbono Shalom, Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is Torah, and this is the requisite, the commensurate reward. Amar Le, he gives him the same enigmatic answer. Shtok, kach Allah b'machshana lefanai. Be quiet, don't ask questions, you don't understand. This is the way I think, not the way you think. So this is the first time where we see the question of someone who's good by any accounts. Rabbi Akiva is one of the greatest people that have ever lived. When Moshe Rabbeinu said that he's worthy to give the Torah, and the Almighty says, yeah, maybe he was worthy to give the Torah. Rabbi Akiva, of course, is the foundation of Torah Sheba'al Peh. All the halacha of Torah Sheba'al Peh came through Rabbi Akiva and his 5 students, like the Gemara says. And he's dying such a terrible, horrible death. Right? The Romans are flaying his skin. They're weighing it as if he's a piece of meat. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, wait a minute. Zu Torah v'zu schara, the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, and this is how he gets treated. This is how he gets rewarded. This seems to be punishment. It seems to be bad things happening to good people. And what does the Almighty's response? Shtok, don't ask questions. Be quiet. Silence. This is the way I think. You'll never get it. So that's the first time the question's answered. So I think there's a few interesting things that we could kind of take at first analysis. So first of all, this Gemara is a very perplexing, but also very intriguing, very interesting Gemara. Like Moshe Rabbeinu's time traveling. This is a Gemara about time travel. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to sit and listen into the lecture of an event that happened 1,500 years in the past. That's, I think, fantastically interesting. How does that happen? But besides for that, like with regards to our question, Moshe says he's so impressed with the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, and he says, you showed me his Torah, now show me his reward. So what does the Almighty show him? Does the Almighty show him his reward? Does the Almighty show Rabbi Akiva and Gan Eden or Olam Haba? No, the Almighty shows him being tortured and punished in a horrible, gruesome way. Understand, Moshe asked a question. Show me the Torah. You showed me his Torah. Now show me his reward. And now instead of showing reward, he's showing punishment. So what's going on? Why is the Almighty showing him punishment when Moshe asked to see reward? That's question number 1. Question number 2, Moshe seems to be asking a very fair question. Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is the Torah and this is the reward. Bad things happen to good people. And what does the Almighty? It seems like it's a decent question. And the Almighty's response is, shtok, don't ask questions, don't this is the way I think. It doesn't seem like it's a legitimate answer. Moshe Rabbeinu is asking a very fair question. Why is the Almighty, at least initially, at first glance, not giving a fair answer? So I want to point out that the Ramban in Shara Gmul, he talks about Rabbi Akiva, and he says that the suffering of Rabbi Akiva is something we cannot possibly understand. That's what he said. That's his position. It's inexplicable. There's no way for us to understand it. Now, what's interesting is that, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't understand it. And if you look at sources number 2 and 3, you'll see the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells that Adam was given a book by God. And the book included in it all the events and all the personalities of all future generations. And as he's perusing through the book, he gets to the generation of Rabbi Akiva, and the Gemara says, once he reached the Gemara, the door, the generation of Rabbi Akiva, samach betoraso, he was delighted with his Torah, v'nis atzev, but he was devastated, he was disappointed, he was saddened, b'misaso, with his death. It seems like Adam, this is Adam, of course, pre-sin. Adam, before he sinned, was a complete intellect, was like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? They're supernatural. He might have been able to time travel as well. Maybe. But even he didn't understand it. And that's the only thing that we're told that he didn't understand. So this seems to fit very nicely with the Ramban, that indeed Rabbi Akiva's death and the suffering of tzaddikim like Rabbi Akiva is something that's beyond us. We can never understand it. Maybe. That's what Ramban said. And thirdly, in the other source number 4, the source number 4 tells of Rabbi Akiva's death itself. And we'll get to the story a little bit, but either way, the Gemara tells that the Romans brought him to kill him, and he was so delighted. And why was he so happy? He says, every day I said the prayer, I wanted to give up my life to God, and I always said, and I pined, and I yearned, and I hoped, when will this opportunity come for me and I can fulfill it? And finally, I could fulfill it, and he was so excited. But the epilogue of that story is that there was a baskol, there was a prophetic announcement, praise is Rabbi Akiva, that your neshama exited your body while saying the Shema. Fine. Amru malachei hasharis of Kadosh Baruch Hu, zu Torah, zu schara. Says the malachei hasharis, the angels They said to God, this is Torah, and this is reward, and this is the Gemara Brachos. But it uses this exact same words that the Gemara Menachos uses. The Ramban has really a lot to stand. It seems like the sources really support the Ramban's position that specifically the death of Rabbi Akiva is something that we can't understand. You know why? Because if the angels can't understand it, and Moshe can't understand it, and Adam can't understand it, then maybe it is indeed beyond us. That's what the Ramban says. I want to put that aside because I want to suggest an alternative understanding. Now, when we looked at the Gemara of Rabbi Akiva, of Moshe talking to the Almighty, we asked two questions. First question is, why is the Almighty not giving him a fair answer? Like, why is he telling him to be silent? Give him an answer. He asked a question, why is Rabbi Akiva suffering? Give him an answer. That seems to be fair. But another question we asked, and that is, Moshe asked, Harisani Torasa, you showed me his Torah, now show me his reward. And the Almighty, instead of showing reward, seemed to show punishment. That he was being flayed and being weighed, very horrible and brutally tortured by the Romans. Why is the Almighty not showing Moshe what he's asking to be shown? And the Ramban won't really help that. The Ramban only answers the second question. Moshe asks, why is he suffering? He's such a big tzaddik. And the Almighty says, shtot, don't ask questions you can't possibly understand it. But the other question of why the Almighty doesn't show him the reward when Moshe asks to see the reward, that's not answered. So I want to maybe suggest a different understanding in this whole area. So I want to kind of give a little bit of a background to establish what the question really is. It's a common question to ask, right? It's been asked. Of course, Moshe asked it. We'll see Moshe asks it again. Why bad things happen to good people? Tzaddik viralo. Rabbi Akiva is a tzaddik, by any definition of a tzaddik, of course, and bad things happen to him in his life, and certainly in his death. That's a question that people have asked. But if you actually break down the question, you can realize that there's really three components to the question. There's three assumptions to the question. Right? Assumption number one is the fact that God has complete control over everything. If someone assumes that God doesn't have complete control, there's some element of randomness in the world, right? Things could happen to tzaddikim without God preordaining it or allowing it to happen. It's not really a question. Some guy wrote a book because his kid died. He wrote a book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And that was his conclusion. Bad things happen to good people because it's random. Why the Holocaust happened? One of the local rabbis here said in the conservative shul, why the Holocaust happened? Because God can't control it. Now, that to us is absolute heresy. That's absolute heresy, because we know God's in control over everything. A person can't injure his finger below unless it was thus ordained from above. And certainly tzaddikim. So to say that the Holocaust happened because God doesn't have control, well, if you take that position, then this question is not really a question, right? We don't take that position. We say God has control over everything, and therefore bad things happen to good people must be allowed by God. That's element number one. Element number two is that God has control over everything, but also God is good and fair and just. Because if God is not just, it's not fair, and not good, then of course bad things can happen to good people and bad people. Doesn't matter, right? Because it's not fair, right? We're assuming the Almighty is fair, and if He's fair, then the third part is, well, what do you mean? There's tons of injustice in the world. Someone's righteous, and yet bad things happen to them. That to us seems like it's unjust. So these three elements, these three assumptions, are baked into the question of bad things happening to good people. On one hand, God is in control of everything. On the other hand, God is fair, God's good, God's just. And we see injustice in the world. Tzaddikim, they should have good things happening to them, yet bad things happening to him. It's injustice. What's going on? And so some people try to answer, say, well, God's not in control, or God's not good. To us, we have to find the answer. The Torah answer clearly is that God is good, but what we assume is injustice, it really is just. And the question is, how does that work? So what's interesting here is that Moshe asked God, Zu Torah v'zu schara, bad things happen to good people. And God seems to kind of blow him off and say, no, don't ask questions, be quiet, this is the way I think, not the way you think. But what's interesting is there's another Gemara that the Gemara in Brachos says that the Moshe asked three things from God. So we're going to do just the relevant parts. What were the three things that he asked from God and God granted them? So the one of them is here, Bitesh lahodio drachav shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. He asked that the Almighty will inform Moshe of the ways of God. Shenemar, what's the verse? Hodieni nasrachecha, let me know your ways. He asked to know the ways of God. What does it mean, the ways of God? Says the Gemara, Amar Lefanu, he said to God, Ribono Shalom, Master of the world, Mipnei ma yesh tzaddik v'tovlo. How come there's sometimes a tzaddik and it's good for him? Good things happening to good people. And then v'yesh tzaddik v'ralo, and there's a tzaddik that bad things are happening to good people. And thirdly, yesh rasha v'tovlo, there's an evil person, a wicked person, and it's good for him. Good things happening to bad people. And lastly, v'yesh rasha v'ralo. So this is a much more sophisticated question. I'm saying this question is kind of the same, but it's a much more expanded question. Here he's asking not only why bad things happening to good people, he's asking why good things happening to bad people as well. And plus, how come there's this discrimination between some good people, good things happen to them, while other good people, bad things happen to them, and vice versa. Some evil and wicked people, bad things happening to them, well, that's okay. But then you see other evil people, that good things happen to them. So what's going on? So the Almighty responds, Amar le, tzaddik v'tovlo. A tzaddik, then it's good for him, it's tzaddik gomer, it's a complete tzaddik. A tzaddik v'ralo, a tzaddik that bad things happen to them, tzaddik she'enu gomer, that's an incomplete tzaddik. Rasha v'tovlo, a wicked person that's good for him, it's an incomplete wicked person. He's not totally wicked. And lastly, Rasha v'ralo, someone who's wicked and bad things happen to them, that's a totally wicked person. Says the Almighty, you're right, there's 4 different kinds of people. What are the 4 kinds of people? It's a complete tzaddik, an incomplete tzaddik, a complete Rasha, and an incomplete Rasha. Okay, so let's just analyze. So we see Moshe had asked the question when he went up to heaven. He obviously wasn't happy with the response, and he asked a more expanded version of the question a little bit later on. So I want to just point out that these Gemaras, by the way, are time-stamped. The Gemara Menachos that tells of Moshe Rabbeinu in heaven, when's that? The first words is when Moshe went up to heaven. That is, I guess, by Shavuos, right? Moshe goes up to heaven, and I guess he's there for 40 days, and over the course of those 40 days, he asks the question, why are you making the pictures of the crowns? And then he sees Rabbi Akiva, and the whole dialogue ensues. The Gemara Brachos, on source number 5, that Gemara is later. That Gemara is after Moshe comes back in Yom Kippur, after the Almighty says, Salachti kedvarecha. Then the famous verse where he tells the Almighty, Hodenis rachecha, show me your ways. And the Almighty says, okay, you can't see my front because then you'll die, but you see my back and go in the cleft in the rock and I'll pass before you. All that already happened later. So it's interesting to note that these episodes are possibly 90 days apart, a couple of months apart from each other, clearly. So it's interesting that Moshe asked first, why does Rabbi Akiva being punished? The Almighty says, shtok, don't ask questions. And then he asks the same question in a more expanded version a couple of months later and got a different answer. So I think a few questions we can kind of raise. First of all, Moshe asked the question already. He may have been unsatisfied with the response, but why would he ask God the same question? When he asked the question prior. So yes, of course he expanded the question, but he still included tzaddik v'ralo. The question of bad things happening to good people, the question of why Rabbi Akiva had to suffer, that a question he asked before, now he's asking again. What's going on? And not only that, the Almighty gives him a different response. Why does the Almighty say, shtok, kachal machshol lefonei, don't ask questions? That seemed to have been the response he gave prior. Why would he give a different answer the second go-round? Third question. The verse says, Hode'eni nasrachecha, let me know your ways, the ways of God. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? The Gemara interprets that the ways of God are bad things happening to good people, good things to bad people, etc., etc. Wait a minute. The ways of God, isn't that more expansive than just the question of bad things to good people, good things to bad people? The ways of God are, I don't know what the ways of God, but it seems like if I said, what are the ways of God? What does that include? You would say, that includes a lot. It's a very exhaustive question. And Moshe, according to the Gemara, Moshe is only asking to know a very narrow perspective of why the Almighty treats righteous people and wicked people with either good or bad. The 4 kinds of things that he sees in the world of good people, and bad things and good things. It seems like show me the ways of God should be more inclusive. The last question is, now wait a minute. If someone is an incomplete tzaddik, well, they're still a tzaddik, but bad things are happening to them. But they're still better off than someone who's an incomplete Rasha, who's a Rasha, not totally wicked, but still a Rasha, still wicked. So why would the Rasha have good things happening to them, and the tzaddik, not a perfect tzaddik, but still a tzaddik, have bad things happen to them? So the Maharsha explains, when a tzaddik who's not complete, bad things happen to them. Valkein ralo, it's bad for him. Bad things happen to him. Why? Al miut avonosav, because a tzaddik who's incomplete, who's not perfect, well, what does that mean? It means he still has a few sins, right? So therefore, bad things happen in this world to pay, to rectify the miut, the small amount of sins that he has, in order that he should merit olam haba. Ubehepach, and the opposite. Birasha, when someone's a rasha, someone's wicked, but he's not totally wicked, he still has a few redeeming mitzvahs. It's tov lo b'olam hazeh, it's good for him in this world, so that he exhausts his schar, his reward, in this world. He's a rasha after all, but he still did a few mitzvahs. And therefore he has to get the reward for those mitzvahs, but let him get it in this world. But his full punishment for being wicked, that's all complete for olam haba. Now, what the Gemara is saying is like this, according to the Maharsha, and that's, I think, Pasha Pshat. When someone does a mitzvah, they get schar. You get reward. When someone does a sin, they get punishment. That's across the board. If someone's a tzaddik, does the Almighty say, I'm ignoring mitzvahs? I'm ignoring your misdeeds, I'm ignoring your sins? No. Even someone who's a tzaddik, they have to find a way to pay punishment for their sins. And even someone's a rasha, someone's wicked in aggregate, but they still have some mitzvos, they have to get the reward for those mitzvos. Says the Gemara, reward and punishment are both amplified in olam haba. So, it's beneficial to not cash in on your reward in this world, rather to wait for olam haba, and therefore to get it when it's actually worth a lot more. It's like you don't want to, if you knew the stock was going up, you don't want to sell it now, right? It's better to wait and hold and and sell it when it appreciates. So you don't want to use up your reward here in this world and get paid in pesos when you can cash out in kilos of gold. Conversely, the punishment in olam haba is much more severe. So it's better to have a little slap in the wrist here and not get a tremendously more stringent punishment in olam haba. Therefore, the Almighty says, if someone's a tzaddik, but they still have some sins, they're not complete tzaddik, they still have some sins, it's bad for them in this world, and they get rid of their punishment, but olam haba is still perfect. The reward in olam haba is complete. Someone who's an incomplete rasha, he's not totally wicked, he still has some redeeming mitzvos to them. Okay, it's good for them in this world. They use up their reward in this world, and olam haba get what they really deserve in the form of punishment. And by the way, the Gemara actually, on source number 7, spells this out very clearly. The Gemara says, El emunah ve'ein avel. The Almighty is God of faith who doesn't do anything wrong. What does that mean? Kishem shenefra min harishayim l'olam haba. Afila alver kala, just like Rishayim, wicked people, are punished on every sin in olam haba. Kach nifra min tzadikim ba'olam hazeh alver kala she'osim. So too, tzadikim have to be punished in this world for every even minor sin. If someone's a tzaddik, they still are not absolved from having to pay for their sins. And conversely, ve'ein avel. Just like the reward is for tzaddikim and olam haba, even in a small mitzvah, so too the reward for Rishayim, for wicked people, is in olam hazeh, in this world, even for a small mitzvah that they do. So what's clear is that the only question is, where are the venues of reward and punishment? The tzaddikim, the venues of reward and punishment are in olam haba. So whatever sins that you have over here, you have to pay for them over here, so it can be bad for you. As opposed to the Rishayim, their reward is over here and their punishment is in olam haba. Okay, so they get the reward over here and their punishment is complete in olam haba. Now, I think what's interesting here is that the Gemara establishes God's fair. If you do a mitzvah, you get reward. If you do a sin, you get punishment, no matter if you're tzaddik or rasha. What's interesting is that the venue of where you get the reward and the punishment Well, that depends if you're a tzaddik or a rasha. So you have a tzaddik on one hand, in one pit, one window, doing a mitzvah, and a rasha, a wicked person, in the other window, doing the same mitzvah. Both of them doing the same mitzvah. The tzaddik gets reward in Olam Haba. The rasha gets reward in Olam Hazeh, this world. So wait a minute, it's still unfair. It's still unfair. How is it fair? If the money is fair, it's not an element of ein alva. The money is fair. Okay. But reward in Olam Haba is so much greater, right? Okay, if it's so much greater in Olam Haba, it's not fair once again. I think the answer is like this. The answer is that the tzaddik and the rasha, they self-selected where they want to receive the reward and where they want to receive their punishment. What does it mean to be a tzaddik? A tzaddik means someone who lives for Olam Haba. If someone is a tzaddik, by definition, they're saying, I want my reward in Olam Haba. If someone's a rasha, they're prioritizing this world over Olam Haba. So they're each opting in to the world that they want to get the reward in. So the money is indeed being fair because the money lets us choose where we want a reward. The tzaddik, by dint of being a tzaddik, by definition almost, is someone who chooses Olam Haba as the reward. That's where they get the reward. The rasha, almost by definition, is someone who selects Olam Hazeh, this world, to get the reward. And therefore, that's where they get it. And by the way, look at the Mishnah. Very famous Mishnah. The Mishnah says that Kina is envy, taiva is lust, and kavod is pursuit of honor. They take someone out of the world. So typically we understand that if someone is lustful or envious or seeking honor, they can't live a normal life. That disrupts their world. I think what this really means is they lose olam haba. Someone who wants kavod, for example, someone who wants honor. What are they saying? They're saying, I did a mitzvah. Give me the honor, right? They're asking for the honor over here. They're self-selecting to get the reward for their good deeds here. So they lose the olam, they lose olam haba. Right? What is someone who has taiva? Someone who's saying, give me worldly pleasures. Oh, you want worldly pleasures? You get worldly pleasures, but you lose olam haba. You must see this olam, you lose olam haba. And envy, by the way, envy is the same thing. When someone is envious of what someone else has in this world, then clearly they view this world as a final destination where it makes sense to be envious. Obviously, not just a process towards a greater world. You're envious, well, then you also lose your personal Olam Haba because you're demonstrating by your actions that you value this world as an end unto itself, and you lose Olam Haba because you'll get Olam Hazeh. You'll get reward here, but you'll lose Olam Haba as well. Okay, so I want to look at source number 9 here. Source number 9 is Rabbi Akiva himself connects all the dots for us. The story goes, Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe, his teacher, Rabbi Eliezer, was sick and dying, and the Talmidim, they all came to visit him. So what happens? Rabbi Eliezer is on his deathbed, and he's in tremendous agony, and he announces, Chema aza yesh ba'olam. There's great fury in the world. And like Rashi says, I wrote this down over here, that Rabbi Eliezer was speaking about himself, that he was the recipient of God's fury, for God had increased his suffering. Rabbi Eliezer was being tormented, was suffering terribly by his illness. And he just announced it to his students. So all the students are there, and they see Rabbi Eliezer, their great teacher. All of them start crying, of course, with the exception of Rabbi Akiva. He starts laughing. They say to him, like, this is inappropriate. Imagine the Rebbe writhing in agony, and suddenly one of the students starts laughing as if he saw the funniest joke in the world, right? What's going on? So they say to him, this is so inappropriate. Why are you laughing? He says to them, of course, why are you crying? They say to him, After Sefer Torah, we have a Sefer Torah, a veritable Torah scroll like Rabbi Eliezer, and he's in pain. V'lo nifkan, we shouldn't cry. That's precisely why I'm laughing. Every time I saw Rebbe, our teacher, his wine doesn't ferment. Ve'ein pishtano loka, and his flax doesn't get ruined. Ve'ein shmano mavish, and his oil doesn't get spoiled. Ve'ein divshano madvish, and his honey doesn't get spoiled. Everything went for him in his life perfectly. I saw Rabbi Eliezer, I'm examining him his whole life, and he never suffered at all. Everything always went for him. Amarti, I said, perhaps our teacher, he received all his reward in Olam Hazeh. Nothing bad ever happened to him in this world. So he must have exhausted all his reward in this world. Now I see him in pain. I'm delighted and excited and joyous, because now I know that his Olam Haba is untainted. So Rabbi Eliezer himself hears this. Amar lo. He said to him, Akiva, klum chisarti min Torah kula. What sins did I do? You're implying that I had to get punishment because of some sins, and you saw no punishment, and now you're happy because you finally see punishment in this world. Thus you know that there's no punishment in the next world. But what have you seen? Amar lo. So he says to them, Lim datanu Rabbeinu, you yourself taught us. Ki adam ein tzaddik ba'arta sheyas tov lo yechta. There's nobody in the world who does good and doesn't sin. Right? Says Rashi, what does it mean? Good? Good is a tzaddik, v'lo ra, and doesn't sin. So there isn't anyone that's a complete tzaddik. Thus, if people have it good in this world, the entirety of this world, it must be that there's punishment awaiting for them in Olam Haba. Says Rabbi Akiva, he's so joyous when he sees his Rebbe suffering because now he knows his portion in Olam Haba is preserved. Let's go back to Moshe. Right, Moshe asks God. He says, "Wow, Rabbi Akiva, well, look what a scholar, right? Unbelievable. Show me his reward. You show me his Torah, now show me his reward." So what's he going to do? He shows him his suffering. Moshe doesn't get it. Moshe's like, wait a minute, Zu Torah v'zu schar, he doesn't at all understand. And we asked the question, legitimate question. Moshe asked to be shown reward. Instead, he's shown punishment. Right? He doesn't get it. Now we see Rabbi Akiva later on, 1,500 years later, is answering the question himself. Moshe asked to be shown Rabbi Akiva's reward, and the Almighty shows him his reward. But Moshe is like, wait a minute, slow down. I see his skin being scraped off of him. Obviously, that's not reward. But the truth is, it really was the reward. Indeed, the Almighty, Moshe asked, show me the reward of Rabbi Akiva, and the Almighty showed him. And Moshe didn't get it. Zu Torah v'zu schar. Why is it indeed his reward? Because Rabbi Akiva himself showed it to us. That when his Rebbe was suffering, he was also laughing in joy and delight. Rabbi Akiva himself demonstrated that receiving punishment here guarantees and precludes someone from being punished in Olam Haba. And indeed, that actually is tremendously wonderful. Rabbi Akiva himself understood. If you ask Rabbi Akiva, where was your reward? He himself showed it to us. He was delighted when his Rebbe was suffering. Wouldn't he also be delighted when he was suffering as well for the same reasons? Of course. And Moshe doesn't get it. Moshe's like, wait a minute, Zu Torah v'zu schara? Like, where's the reward? So Moshe says, you don't get it, obviously. This is the way I think you can possibly understand it. Now, what happens a few months later? A few months later, in the intervening period, right, Moshe becomes a greater person. Moshe, of course, he comes down from the mountain, his face is shining. Like we said previously, Moshe Rabbeinu is living in Olam Haba. Moshe Rabbeinu had removed himself of any vestiges of his guf. He's able now to really get into the sugya once more. He knows that previously asked the question, he didn't get a good answer. Moshe says, you'll never get it. You don't understand the way I think. A few months later, right, what happens? Moshe Rabbeinu asks again. He says, I want to ask you a question. Tzaddik Viralo. Same question I asked you prior. It's the same question. And you know what? They might have given him the same answer. But this time it made sense to him. Indeed, when Moshe asked the second time, he said, Tzaddik Viralo, what's the deal? And I says, Tzaddik She'enu Gomer. It's an incomplete tzaddik. What does it mean, Tzaddik She'enu Gomer? Like the Gemara said earlier, Ein tzaddik ba'aretz ashiyas tov v'le'echta. If Rabbi Akiva says his whole life he's worried about his Rebbe. Obviously, Rabbi Akiva never entertained the option that his Rebbe is tzaddik gomer. How is that possible? So what's tzaddik gomer? That's a good question. But either way, the Gemara is clear. Rabbi Akiva himself said that there's no tzaddik gomer. Therefore, if a tzaddik is not suffering, we're very worried because what's going to be in Olam Haba? Correct. Indeed, what happens? Moshe Rabbeinu asks, "Show me his reward." And he showed him the reward, and Rabbi didn't get it. The Gemara over there in Menachos already established a precedent. There was something Rabbi Akiva understood, and Moshe did not understand. Clearly, maybe the Gemara is establishing how this works is a good question. Maybe we don't understand it. Rabbi Akiva understood it. Moshe initially didn't understand it. Maybe later he did. This idea that suffering is good can only be if we look at Olam Haba as being everything, and this world as being just a way to get there. Perhaps a weird mashal, we could say, that if we're like in this terminal, we're trying to get to our destination, and then we take one of those little speedy things, those, what are they called?
Walkways.
The walkways. We take the walk and we get there fast. No one says, "Oh, I punished because I had spent the less time in the cylinder walking into my." No one says that. We're kind of happy. We got to our destination first. Of course, for us, it's hard to reorient ourselves to think that this world is just a prose of Olam Haba. But if it really is, like Rabbi Akiva believed, and the whole goes Olam Haba, then it makes sense that it's possible to argue that he could be delighted and it could be schar for him to get his punishment here. Now, we ask the question. Moshe asks the Almighty, he says, Hode'eni nasrachacha, let me know your ways, which seems to be a much more expansive question than just theodicy, why bad things happen to good people. But perhaps now, when Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to understand and unravel what the Almighty told him previously, that Hariyasani Torah, you show me his Torah, show me his schar, and he shows him punishment, Moshe doesn't get it. So obviously he realized that there's a whole world view that the Almighty has. This is the way the Almighty thinks. Says Moshe, wait a minute, this is the way you're thinking. I don't get it. Show me your ways. Rabbi says, so why is that? He's really asking about he's asking the same question he asked prior. He didn't understand. Because it's the ways of God. Now he says, now I want to understand the ways of God. And now he gets it. Because indeed, to have the notion of tzaddik for Ralo, and tzaddik and Rabbi Akiva being delighted and excited to get the punishment here, all that is based upon a much bigger, grander worldview that the Almighty has, that Olam Haba is really all that matters. And here, indeed, it's just a means, not an end at all. And indeed, just to finalize this idea, the Gemara says in Shabbos, a very peculiar idea here. The Gemara says, Aluvim ve'enum olvim, people that are shamed. This is in source number 10, it's only on the Hebrew side. People that are shamed but don't respond in kind. Shomach harpas ve'enum meshivim, people that hear their shame and don't respond. Osim ahav, people do mitzvah b'ahav. V'smeichim b'yisurim, and are happy with Yisurim. Aleim harpas of Omer, on those people, the verse tells us, v'ovav k'seis shemesh b'varaso. Every time it says that pasuk, it's referring to Olam Haba. It says those people have Olam Haba. I think we could say if someone's happy with Yisurim, just why would someone ever be happy with pain? Well, we know Rabbi Akiva was himself happy with pain, with suffering, with Yisurim. We know that Rabbi Eliezer, in that episode, he was happy. We saw Rabbi Akiva himself, when he himself was being punished, he was happy. Why? Because he obviously had a worldview that looked at Olam Haba as central, and this world as being tertiary. By dint of that, if this world is just ancillary, it's just a means, not an end, well, then that's how you get Olam Haba. Thus, if someone is happy with Yisurim, that demonstrates that they're living for Olam Haba, and thus they are a member of that select fraternity.